Come with me. The CEO rescued his daughter from the streets. What made her end up like this is shocking. If this story interested you, please subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's begin. Richard Morgan took a deep breath as he disembarked at Denver International Airport. 3 weeks abroad had been productive for Infocore America, his technology company that was now establishing itself as a leader in artificial intelligence solutions in North America. The meetings in Japan had resulted in multi-million-dollar contracts that put the Colorado-based company on the global map of technological innovation. The 42-year-old executive adjusted his impeccably tailored suit jacket as he walked through the concourse, ignoring the curious glances from those who recognized the face that frequently appeared in business and finance magazines. "Where to, sir?" the taxi driver asked after stowing the luggage in the trunk. "Cherry Creek." "Please," Richard replied, settling into the back seat and already checking the accumulated messages on his phone. The Denver sky gradually darkened as a light rain began to fall, fogging the windows and creating a melancholic filter over the urban landscape. Richard barely noticed the city passing by outside. His mind was occupied with spreadsheets, profit projections, and expansion strategies. There was no room for contemplation or for the homesickness he should have felt. After all, what he wanted most right now was a hot shower, a glass of red wine, and absolute silence until Monday, when he would resume his frantic office routine. "Sir, we're taking a detour because of the congestion on the main avenue," the driver informed him, turning onto a narrower street in the uptown neighborhood. Richard just nodded, without taking his eyes off his phone screen. It was only when the taxi slowed down for a speed bump that he looked up, letting his gaze wander distractedly along the sidewalk. The day had been long, and he allowed himself a moment of disconnection. It was then that his eyes caught something that didn't fit into that elegant scene of commercial buildings and well-tended trees, a small figure huddled against the wall of a closed shop. At first, he thought it was just a pile of clothes or some object left behind, but as they passed more slowly due to the increasing rain, Richard identified a child. She was dirty, with disheveled hair partially covering her face, and wore a sweatshirt far too large for her fragile frame. In her arms, she clutched what appeared to be a worn-out stuffed animal against her chest. Something about that image had an instantaneous impact on Richard. A sudden discomfort settled in his chest, as if an invisible hand was squeezing his heart. His eyes fixed on the toy the child held so tightly, a brown bear with one ear partially unstitched. That bear, there was something familiar about it. The memory hit him like a lightning bolt. He had given an identical bear to his daughter, Sophia, on her 3rd birthday. The same shade of brown, the same size, even the detail of the ear that came loose easily. "Stop the car!" he ordered suddenly, his voice so abrupt it startled the driver, who braked sharply. "There's something wrong, sir." But Richard was already opening the door, unconcerned about the rain that was now falling more heavily. Something was compelling him outside, a force he couldn't explain. In seconds he was on the sidewalk, his Italian leather shoes stepping in puddles as he approached the child. As he knelt, his knees touched the wet concrete. The child didn't move, remaining huddled, as if trying to become invisible. Carefully, Richard reached out and touched the thin shoulder covered by the soaked sweatshirt. Only then did the little girl lift her face. The world stopped. The air escaped Richard's lungs as if he had taken a blow. There, among the strands of wet hair and under the layer of grime, were the same hazel eyes he knew so well. The same face shape, now much thinner, almost unrecognizable, but undeniably familiar. "Sophia?" he whispered, his trembling voice almost inaudible under the sound of the rain. The girl stared at him with dull eyes, devoid of the sparkle he remembered. There was no immediate recognition, only a frightening emptiness. "Sophia, it's me, Daddy," he said, feeling the words come out strangely from his mouth. How long had it been since he had called her that, since he had acted like a real father? A flicker of recognition seemed to cross the girl's eyes, so fast that Richard almost doubted he had seen it. Without a second thought, he took her in his arms. She was too light, much lighter than a 7-year-old child should be. Carrying her back to the taxi, Richard felt the small body trembling against his, unsure if it was from cold or fear. "Change of plans," he said to the driver, who was watching the scene with bewilderment. "Take us to the Four Seasons Hotel in Lodo, as fast as possible." During the ride, Richard tried to process what was happening. How was his daughter, who should have been safe at home under the care of Camilla, his wife, alone on the street in such a deplorable state? Sophia remained silent, trembling in his arms, clinging to the teddy bear as if her life depended on it. Richard removed his wet suit jacket and wrapped it around her, trying to warm her up. "Everything's going to be okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here now," he murmured, more to himself than to her, as his brain worked frantically to find a logical explanation for this surreal situation. Arriving at the hotel, Richard ignored the stares of the staff as he crossed the luxurious lobby carrying a dirty, wet child. His name and influence were enough to secure a suite immediately, no questions asked. Once they were settled, he requested urgent medical attention. Dr. Frances Anderson arrived discreetly, as Richard had asked. Experienced and professional, she examined Sophia carefully, maintaining a neutral expression, but Richard didn't fail to notice the way she pressed her lips together upon observing certain marks on the girl's body. "Mr. Morgan, we need to talk," the doctor said after finishing the initial examination. "In private." Richard hesitated, not wanting to leave Sophia alone. But the girl had finally succumbed to exhaustion and was sleeping. Curled up in the white sheets of the king-size bed, still clutching the bear. "Your daughter is in a state of significant malnutrition," Dr. Anderson began when they were in the suite's anteroom. "There are signs of anemia, dehydration, and marks consistent with prolonged neglect." "What exactly does that mean?" Richard asked, feeling a rising anger mixed with overwhelming guilt. "She needs immediate hospitalization. There are old bruises, some showing signs of not having been treated properly, and her nutritional state is critical. Frankly, Mr. Morgan, as a doctor, I'm obligated to ask, how long has your daughter been missing?" The question hit Richard like a punch. "She wasn't. She was supposed to be at home with my wife. I've been out of the country for the past 3 weeks. The doctor observed him with a look that mixed skepticism and professional concern. "Well, whatever the situation, she needs hospital care. I can arrange for a discreet ambulance to Rose Medical Center. They have an excellent pediatric wing." Richard agreed, and while the doctor made the necessary arrangements, he picked up his phone. First, he called his personal attorney, Edward Taylor, a family law specialist who had advised him for years. "Edward, I need you now. It's an emergency," he said, as soon as the lawyer answered, briefly explaining the situation. "I'm on my way," was the immediate response. Next, Richard checked his phone and saw several messages from Camilla. The most recent one casually asked if he had arrived in Denver yet and when he would be home. Nothing about Sophia, nothing about a missing child or any emergency. A chill ran down his spine. Richard chose not to reply. He needed to understand what was happening before confronting his wife. In the ambulance, Sophia woke up briefly, clinging to her father with surprising strength for someone so frail. "Don't let her find me," she murmured, before falling back asleep, exhausted. Those simple words pierced Richard's heart with cruel precision. Who was her Camilla? What had happened in his own home while he was immersed in business on the other side of the world? At the hospital, the admission process was swift and discreet, thanks to Richard's influence. The medical team, led by pediatrician Dr. Caroline Stevens, immediately began a series of tests and procedures to stabilize Sophia. With each new result, the doctor's expression grew more grave. "Mr. Morgan, your daughter shows clear signs of prolonged nutritional deprivation," Dr. Stevens explained after the initial tests. "There are indications that she hasn't received adequate food for weeks, perhaps months. We also identified bruises in different stages of healing, suggesting recurring events." Richard listened in a state of shock. How could this have happened? He maintained a full household staff, a housekeeper, a cook, a driver. His house in Cherry Creek was practically a small resort. "I want a full investigation," he told the doctor. "All possible tests, photographic documentation, detailed reports, spare no expense." While Sophia received the necessary medical care, Edward Taylor arrived at the hospital. An experienced lawyer with a presence that inspired confidence, He listened intently as Richard recounted the night's events. "We need to be strategic," Edward said, after a moment of reflection. "If there's neglect or abuse, especially involving your wife, it needs to be documented and addressed legally, but we also need to protect Sophia from further trauma and exposure. What do you suggest?" "First, let's ensure her immediate safety. A temporary protection order can be obtained based on the medical reports. Then a discreet investigation. We need to understand exactly what happened before any direct confrontation with Camilla." Richard agreed, feeling a toxic mix of emotions: guilt for his absence, anger at the possibility that his daughter had been mistreated, fear of what he would discover. As they talked, Richard's phone vibrated again. It was Camilla. "We need to talk," Edward said. Observing his client's expression upon seeing his wife's name on the screen, "How do you want to proceed?" Richard stared at the phone for a long moment, then silenced it. "First, let's make sure Sophia is safe and receiving all the necessary care. Then we investigate. I want to know exactly what happened in my absence before I confront Camilla." "A sensible approach," Edward agreed. "I'll start the necessary legal proceedings to protect your daughter. I also suggest hiring discreet investigators to understand what happened. Former employees from your house might have valuable information." That night, Richard remained by Sophia's bedside, watching his daughter's pale face as she slept, now connected to hydration drips and monitors. The teddy bear remained firmly secured in her thin arms. Carefully, Richard adjusted it, noticing how the unstitched ear drooped to the side, exactly as it had on the day he bought it. 3 years ago. He remembered that birthday, the elaborate party Camilla had planned, the expensive gifts, the perfect photos for social media. How many of those memories were real, and how many were just facades? For how long had he been blind, too focused on conquering the world to notice what was happening inside his own home? A nurse entered quietly to check the monitors. "Is she going to be okay?" Richard asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. The nurse offered a gentle smile. "Physically, yes, she's strong, despite everything she's been through. The team is doing everything possible." When she left, Richard held his daughter's small, fragile hand, feeling the weak pulse beneath his fingers. "Forgive me, Sophia," he whispered. "I wasn't there when you needed me, but that's going to change, I promise." Outside the room, the rain continued to fall on Denver, washing the streets and creating an opaque curtain over the city lights. Somewhere in that same city, Camilla Morgan continued to send messages, apparently oblivious to the fact that her world was about to crumble. And as the night wore on, Richard began to formulate a plan, not just to uncover the truth, but to rebuild what had been broken. Not his company or his reputation, but something far more valuable that he had neglected for too long: his family, or what was left of it. In the silence of the hospital room, illuminated only by the soft glow of the monitors, he made a silent promise to his sleeping daughter. She would never be alone again. Never again. The next morning, Richard awoke with a stiff neck from sleeping in the armchair beside Sophia's bed. Through the hospital window, he could see the sun rising over the contours of the Rocky Mountains, painting the Denver sky with hues of orange and pink. For a moment, he watched his daughter, who was still asleep, her face less tense than the night before, but still marked by a seriousness that no 7-year-old should have. His phone, on silent mode, displayed dozens of notifications. Camilla had called repeatedly during the night, and her messages had evolved from casual questions to increasingly insistent demands about his and Sophia's whereabouts. The last message, sent at 3:42 a.m., contained a veiled threat to call the police if he didn't get in touch. A light knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Edward, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, carrying a briefcase and a thermos of coffee. "Figured you'd need this," and he said, offering a steaming cup to Richard. "How is she?" "Stable," Richard replied, gratefully accepting the coffee. "The doctors said she'll be here for a few days." "At least." "I got the emergency protection order," Edward informed him, opening his briefcase. "Based on the preliminary medical reports, the judge granted the restraining order without a prior hearing. This ensures you have exclusive temporary custody of Sophia and prevents Camilla from approaching her until the court hearing." Richard nodded, feeling a moment of relief. I've also discreetly started an investigation. I managed to locate Mrs. Vera, the housekeeper who worked at your house for 2 years and was fired about 6 months ago. She agreed to talk, but she's scared. Scared of what? Apparently, when she was fired, Camilla made her sign a very strict non-disclosure agreement with significant legal threats. Richard frowned, surprised. He didn't remember any such agreement, although, on second thought, he barely got involved in domestic matters. I need to talk to her, he said. And to any other former employee who might have witnessed something. Edward nodded. We're already on it. I've also requested access to the security camera footage from your house. Camilla might have deleted anything incriminating. Probably, but the security system you installed keeps cloud backups for 90 days. With a court order, we can access them directly through the security company, without her knowledge. Richard took a sip of coffee, impressed by Edward's efficiency. At the same time, he felt a pang of shame for his own negligence as a father. All that advanced security system in his house, and he had never thought to use it to check on his own daughter during his long absences. What is Camilla saying? Edward asked, pointing to the phone that continued to accumulate notifications. She wants to know where we are. She's threatening to call the police. She doesn't know where you are. No. And I plan to keep it that way until we understand the situation better. Edward nodded thoughtfully. That could work in our favor or against us, depending on how she reacts. Legally, not informing the mother of the child's whereabouts can be problematic, but with the protection order and the medical reports, we have grounds to justify it. She's not Sophia's biological mother, Richard corrected automatically. Camilla is her stepmother, Sophia's mother. And my first wife, Dita Beatrice, passed away when she was 2. An expression of understanding crossed Edward's face. That changes some legal aspects, especially if there was no formal adoption. Their conversation was interrupted by a slight movement on the bed. Sophia was waking up, her eyes scanning the room with a mix of confusion and fear until they landed on Richard. There was no smile, just a subtle relaxation of the tension in her face. "Hi, Princess Ine," Richard said softly, approaching the bed. "How are you feeling?" Sophia didn't respond verbally, just hugged the teddy bear to her chest and looked anxiously at the door. "It's okay. You're safe here," Richard assured her. "This is Uncle Edward. He's my friend and he's here to help us." Edward approached with a gentle smile. "Hello, Sophia. That's a nice bear you have there." The girl remained silent, but her eyes studied Edward intently. Sizing him up. "You must be hungry," Richard continued. "I'll ask the nurse to bring breakfast, okay?" At that moment, the pediatrician, Dr. Stevens, entered the room, accompanied by a middle-aged woman with a serene and professional expression. "Good morning," the doctor greeted. "Sophia, how are you today?" Without waiting for a response, she checked the monitors and made some notes. "Your tests show an improvement in your hydration levels," which is great. Turning to Richard, Dr. Stevens made the introductions. "Mr. Morgan, this is Marion Roberts, our child psychologist specializing in trauma. If you agree, she would like to talk with Sophia for a bit." Richard looked at his daughter, who seemed to have shrunk even more with the presence of more people in the room. "I think we need to take it slow," he said. "Sophia is still very scared." "I completely understand," Marion replied in a calm, professional voice. "There's no rush. I can just be around today, without any formal therapy attempt, just to establish a familiar and safe presence." Edward discreetly pulled Richard aside. "It would be good to allow the psychologist to start working with her as soon as possible," he advised. "Her testimony will be important for the case, but more than that, she needs support to process what she's been through." Richard hesitated, torn between the desire to protect his daughter from more stress and the understanding that she needed specialized help. "All right," he finally agreed, "but I want to be present." "Actually," Marion intervened gently, "it would be better if we could create a space where Sophia feels safe to express her emotions without worrying about her parents' reaction. I promise to approach her with extreme care, respecting her pace." Reluctantly, Richard agreed. While the medical team tended to Sophia, he and Edward retreated to the hallway to continue their conversation. "We need to establish a more permanent base of operations," Edward said. The hospital is safe for now, but Sophia will need a place to stay when she's discharged. I can't take her home, obviously. No, definitely not. I suggest renting an apartment in a secure condominium, preferably with controlled access and without disclosing your name. I have some contacts who can arrange that discreetly, Richard agreed. And we need to intensify the investigation. I want to know exactly what happened in my house. In the following hours, while Sophia received medical care and had her first contact with Marion, Richard and Edward developed a meticulous plan. Private investigators were hired to locate and interview former employees. A technical team was assigned to recover and analyze the security camera footage. Financial experts began to review the bank accounts related to Sophia's trust and household expenses. In the afternoon, Richard received the first preliminary report, a financial analysis showing suspicious transactions, an account established specifically for Sophia's expenses and education, funded by Beatrice's life insurance, showed regular withdrawals over the past 2 years. The money, which was supposed to be used exclusively for the girl's well-being, was being systematically transferred to shell companies that, after an initial investigation, appeared to have connections to Camilla's personal business dealings. This is a clear misappropriation of funds, the financial analyst explained over the phone. And we're talking about nearly $500,000 over the last 24 months. Richard felt his blood boil, not because of the money itself, he had more than enough, but because of the betrayal it represented. Camilla was stealing Sophia's future, the legacy left by her biological mother. By late afternoon, the first former employee agreed to give her statement. Mrs. Vera, a 62-year-old woman who had worked as a housekeeper in the Morgan mansion for over 2 years, met with Richard and Edward in a private room at the law firm. Visibly nervous, she hesitated at first, but when Richard assured her she would be legally protected from any retaliation, she began to speak. In the beginning, everything seemed normal, Mrs. Vera reported, her hands restless in her lap. Mrs. Camilla was kind, careful with the house, and even with the girl. But things started to change after the first year, especially when you were traveling. Richard listened with growing horror as Mrs. Vera described how, gradually, Camilla's attitude toward Sophia had deteriorated. First, small acts of impatience, then unjustified dietary restrictions, disproportionate punishments, and eventually episodes of active cruelty. She would lock the girl in her room for hours, sometimes days, Mrs. Vera recounted, tears in her eyes. Once, when little Sophia spilled juice on the new carpet, Mrs. Camilla left her without dinner for 2 days. I tried to bring her food in secret, but when she found out— "What happened?" Edward asked, noticing her hesitation. "She threatened me, said she would sue me for theft, that she had evidence I was stealing jewelry. After that, I tried to help Sophia without anyone noticing, but it got harder and harder. Mrs. Camilla started monitoring the house cameras obsessively when you were away. Why didn't you tell me?" Richard asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Why didn't you call or send a message?" Mrs. Vera looked down. "I tried Mr. Morgan 3 times. The first time you didn't answer. The second you said you were in a meeting and would have your assistant call me back, which never happened. The third time, Mrs. Camilla intercepted the call and, well, 2 weeks later I was fired." Richard felt as if he had been punched in the gut. He vaguely remembered a call from Mrs. Vera, something about concerns with the house, but he had delegated the matter, like so many others, to be handled by his team, or by Camilla. Mrs. Vera's testimony was followed by that of George, the former gardener, who confirmed having often seen Sophia crying alone in the garden, apparently forbidden from entering the house for hours, even on rainy or hot days. And then came Teresa, a former cook, who reported how Camilla strictly controlled Sophia's food portions, claiming concerns about tendencies to gain weight that the girl had supposedly inherited from her biological mother. With each new testimony, the picture of neglect and cruelty became clearer, more disturbing, and Richard's guilt grew proportionally, a heavy, suffocating presence that threatened to swallow him whole. At the end of the day, emotionally and physically exhausted, Richard returned to the hospital. He found Sophia awake, silently drawing under the supervision of a nurse. The drawing showed a solitary figure, clearly Sophia herself, sitting outside a large house and with rain falling. There were no colors, only grey lines that conveyed a deep desolation. "Hi, Princess," Richard said, sitting beside her. "What a beautiful drawing you're making." Sophia didn't answer, but pushed the paper towards him, as if wanting him to understand something. In the corner of the drawing, almost hidden, was another figure, an adult silhouette watching from a window, with what looked like a disturbingly large smile on its face. Richard felt a shiver. "Who is that, Sophia?" The girl finally spoke, her voice so low he barely heard it. "The witch. The witch," Richard repeated, trying to keep his voice calm despite the alarm he felt. Sophia just nodded, returning her focus to the drawing, now adding what looked like bars to the windows of the house. Marion, the psychologist, who was observing discreetly from the doorway, motioned for Richard. In the hallway, she explained, "It's common for traumatized children to use archetypal figures like witches or monsters to represent abusers. It's a distancing mechanism that helps them process the experience." "She's talking about Camilla," Richard concluded, feeling sick. "Probably, but Sophia is starting to communicate, which is a positive sign. She trusts you enough to share, even if symbolically, what she's been through." "What should I do?" "Continue to be a constant and reliable presence. Don't pressure her to talk, but be available when she wants to. And prepare for a long recovery process." That night, while Sophia slept, Richard received a call from Edward. The technical team had recovered some footage from the house's security cameras. The lawyer sent a short video to Richard's email. With trembling hands, Richard opened the file. The recording, dated just 2 weeks prior, showed the mansion's backyard. It was night, raining. Sophia, wearing only thin pajamas, was sitting under a tree, soaked, clinging to her bear. In the corner of the video, Camilla's silhouette could be seen in a second-floor window, watching. The similarities to Sophia's drawing were disturbing. The date stamp in the corner of the screen read 11:42 p.m. The child remained there for nearly an hour, according to the camera's log, before finally being allowed into the house through the back door. Richard turned off the video, unable to watch anymore. The lump in his throat threatened to choke him. How could he have been so blind, so absent, so easily deceived? His phone vibrated with a message from Camilla. "I know you're with her. You don't understand what you're doing. That girl is manipulative and a liar, just like her mother. Come home now with her, or you will regret this." Richard stared at the message, feeling a strange calm replace the emotional storm inside him. It was the calm of certainty, of absolute determination. He didn't reply to the message, but he made a call. "Edward, yes, I saw the video. I want to use all of this. I want full custody of Sophia, and I want to ensure Camilla can never get near her again, no matter the cost, no matter what it takes. And one more thing, I want her to pay. Legally, financially, socially, I want complete justice." On the other end of the line, Edward replied with the same resolute calm, "We're just getting started, Richard, but I promise you we will win." Hanging up, Richard looked at Sophia, sleeping with the teddy bear safe in her arms. That bear he had given her years ago, that she had somehow kept through all this suffering. "Never again, Princess," he whispered, gently stroking his daughter's hair. "You will never be alone again." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in Cherry Creek, Camilla Morgan paced nervously through the empty rooms of the mansion, making call after call, trying to find out where her husband had taken her stepdaughter. She didn't know it yet, but her carefully constructed world was already crumbling around her. 3 days later, Sophia was discharged from the hospital. Richard had followed Edward's advice and rented an apartment in a discreet condominium in the Washington Park area, far from the mansion in Cherry Creek. The property, registered in the name of one of Edward's companies, offered the anonymity and security they needed at that moment. The apartment was carefully prepared for Sophia's arrival. Richard hired an interior designer specializing in children's rooms to create a welcoming and safe space. The walls were painted in soft shades of green, Sophia's favorite color before this whole situation. A canopy bed, shelves filled with children's books, an art corner with an easel and painting supplies, and a small shelf with new stuffed animals. Everything was designed to give the girl a sense of security and normalcy. It's important for her to have an environment that conveys safety and at the same time stimulates her expression, explained Marion, the psychologist, who was closely monitoring the entire process. Children who have gone through traumas like hers often have difficulty expressing their emotions verbally, but they can do so through drawings, paintings, or play. On moving day, Sophia timidly entered the apartment, still clutching her worn-out teddy bear. Her eyes scanned the environment cautiously, as if looking for traps or reasons to be suspicious. Richard watched, his heart aching, as his daughter walked through the space with hesitant steps, almost on tiptoe, as if trying not to make a sound. "This is our new home, Princess," he said softly. "What do you think?" Sophia didn't answer, but when she reached the room prepared especially for her, her eyes widened slightly. She touched the soft quilt on the bed, ran her fingers over the colorful spines of the books, and stopped in front of the painting easel. "It's all yours," Richard continued. "You can draw, paint, read, play, whatever you want." For a fleeting moment, something like a smile crossed the girl's face. So quickly that Richard almost doubted he had seen it. It was the first positive reaction he had observed since finding her on that rainy night. Establishing a routine became the priority. Richard completely reorganized his professional schedule, delegating responsibilities and cancelling trips. For the first time in years, InfoCore America would have to function without his constant presence. To Richard's surprise, his executive team proved to be extremely understanding and competent, taking on projects and making decisions he had previously insisted on centralizing. "Maybe it's a lesson," commented Melissa Albright, his CFO and longtime friend, during a video conference. "The company won't fall apart without you checking every spreadsheet, Richard. Focus on your daughter now. We'll handle the rest." Sophia's therapy sessions were arranged in the apartment itself, creating a safe and familiar environment. In the first few days, Marion focused mainly on building trust, using games and artistic activities to connect with the girl. Sophia still spoke very little, but she began to express herself through her drawings. The themes were recurring: houses with barred windows, solitary figures in the rain, and the constant presence of the witch, always watching, always smiling in a disturbing way. Gradually, through careful questions and sensitive interpretation, Marion began to piece together what Sophia had experienced. The neglect was systematic, the psychologist explained to Richard after a week of sessions. Sophia was regularly deprived of adequate food, emotional comfort, and in some cases, even basic shelter, being forced to stay in the garden or garage for long periods as a form of punishment. "Punishment for what?" Richard asked, feeling the anger build inside him. "For trivial things, mostly. Spilling food, making noise, asking for attention, behaviors that are absolutely normal for a child her age." Richard closed his eyes, trying to control the wave of fury and guilt that threatened to swallow him. How could this have happened? How did I not see it? Marion watched him with understanding, but without condescension. "People like Camilla are often extremely skilled at keeping up appearances. They show a completely different face to the outside world." "But I'm her father," Richard insisted. "I should have noticed." "Yes, you should have," Marion agreed softly. "But you're here now, and that's what matters to Sophia. She needs to know she can count on you from now on, not that you're blaming yourself for the past." While Sophia slowly began to adapt to her new environment, the investigation into Camilla's actions advanced rapidly. Edward had assembled a formidable team of professionals: investigators, forensic accountants, digital security experts, and forensic psychologists. The financial records revealed a disturbing pattern. Over the last 3 years, Camilla had systematically siphoned funds from Sophia's trust account, established with the life insurance from Beatrice, the girl's biological mother. The money, which was meant to ensure Sophia's education and well-being until she came of age, was being transferred to a complex network of shell companies. "She created a sophisticated scheme," explained Leonard Quinn, the forensic accountant hired by Edward. "The transfers were justified as educational expenses or specialized therapies, but the money ended up in personal accounts or in companies linked to a luxury resort project on the Florida coast." The Bella Vista Resort? Richard asked, surprised. But that's Camilla's personal project. She told me she was using her own capital from her family's inheritance. Leonard shook his head. The initial capital may have come from there, but the latest contributions, almost $2 million DAOs, came directly from Sophia's fund through a series of transactions designed to hide the origin. The investigation didn't stop at finances. The security camera footage from the mansion, recovered from cloud backups, provided devastating visual evidence of the treatment Sophia received. Videos showed the girl being locked in her room for hours, deprived of meals, and, in the most severe cases, expelled from the house to spend the night in the garden, as had happened on the fateful night Richard found her. "The level of cruelty is staggering," Edward commented after reviewing the footage with the team. "There's a clear pattern of abusive behavior, with a progressive escalation in recent months." Particularly disturbing was a video from the night Richard had left the US for his trip to Japan, 3 weeks before finding Sophia. The footage showed Camilla confronting the girl in the living room, accusing her of ruining an expensive dress. The audio captured Camilla saying, "Your father is far away, and you know what that means, don't you? No one to cry to, no one to protect you. Maybe this time I'll send you away for good." The video sequence showed Sophia being dragged to her room, which was then locked from the outside. The internal cameras in the room had been turned off, but those in the hallway showed that the door remained locked for nearly 48 hours, with Camilla occasionally leaving a tray with minimal amounts of food outside. The testimonies from former employees continued to pile up, each more disturbing than the last. In addition to Mrs. Vera, Teresa, and George, other former employees of the mansion came forward, encouraged by the guarantee of legal protection against Camilla's threats. Particularly important was the testimony of David Sterling, the family's former driver, who reported how Camilla often instructed him to drop Sophia off at school hours before classes began, regardless of the weather, and to pick her up as late as possible. On some occasions, he had been instructed to ignore calls from the school informing him that Sophia was sick or needed to be picked up early. "Once, the school coordinator called me personally," David recounted. "Sophia had a high fever, over 102 degrees. When I informed Mrs. Camilla, she said she was too busy with a charity event and that I should tell the school to give her a fever reducer and keep her there until the end of the day." The hypocrisy was glaring. While neglecting and mistreating her stepdaughter, Camilla was building a public image as a philanthropist dedicated to children's causes. Photographs at charity events, speeches on the well-being of underprivileged children, public donations to institutions, all part of a carefully constructed facade. "She used charity as a shield," Edward observed. "It's a classic strategy. Who would suspect that someone so publicly dedicated to helping children would be abusing one in her own home?" The investigation also revealed something Richard had never suspected. Camilla was having an affair with Marcus Thorne, one of the investors in the Bella Vista Resort. Messages recovered from a secondary phone, discovered by the investigator in a safe in Camilla's personal office at the mansion, showed explicit conversations and plans for a future together, plans that did not include Richard. By the time the old man finally realizes the money is gone, it will be too late. The resort will be up and running, you'll divorce him with a nice settlement, and I'll get rid of that annoying brat once and for all, read one of Camilla's messages to Marcus, dated just 2 months prior. Richard received this information with a strange mix of shock and detachment. His marriage to Camilla, he now realized, had been built on a false foundation from the start. He had met her 3 years after Beatrice's death, when he was still vulnerable and desperately trying to rebuild some kind of family structure for Sophia, then 5 years old. Camilla, with her charm and apparent devotion to both him and the girl, had seemed like the perfect answer. "I was a fool," Richard admitted to Edward during one of their frequent strategy meetings. "So focused on building an empire that I didn't realize I was handing my daughter over to someone who only saw her as an obstacle." "You weren't the first to be deceived by someone like her, and unfortunately, you won't be the last," Edward replied. "What matters is what we do now." What they were doing was building an impeccable legal case with the accumulated evidence, financial records, testimonies, videos, messages. Edward was confident they could not only secure full custody of Sophia for Richard, but also obtain a criminal conviction for Camilla for abuse, neglect, and misappropriation of funds. While the case was being prepared behind the scenes, Richard focused on rebuilding his relationship with Sophia. Week after week, with infinite patience and unwavering consistency, he worked to regain his daughter's trust. He read to her every night, even when she didn't respond. He sat beside her while she drew or painted, offering presents without pressure. He learned to prepare simple meals she liked and ensured there was always food available, trying to undo years of food insecurity. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Sophia began to respond. One day, she asked for a specific story before bed. On another pair, she agreed to sit on Richard's lap during a movie. Small victories, precious moments of connection that were celebrated silently. "She's building an internal map of safety," Marion explained during one of the weekly follow-up sessions with Richard. "Each positive and consistent experience is like a point on that map, showing her that the world can be predictable and safe." A month after her hospital discharge, a significant breakthrough occurred. Richard was preparing dinner, pasta with tomato sauce, one of the few dishes Sophia consistently ate, when he sensed his daughter's presence at the kitchen door. She rarely approached without being called, preferring to maintain a safe distance from adults. "Can I help?" Sophia asked, her voice so low Richard almost didn't hear. He smiled, trying to contain the emotion that threatened to overflow. "Of course, Princess. Do you want to stir the sauce while I finish cooking the pasta?" Sophia nodded, approaching cautiously. Richard lifted her so she could comfortably reach the stove and placed the wooden spoon in her hand. Together, they finished preparing dinner, in a moment of normalcy that felt like a miracle after everything they had been through. During dinner, Sophia asked another question that caught Richard by surprise. "Are we ever going back to the big house?" Richard chose his words carefully. "No, Sophia, that's not our house anymore. This is our home now, just the two of us. What do you think of that?" Sophia was silent for a long moment, chewing slowly. Finally, she replied, "I like it here. There's no witch." Richard swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "No, Princess, there's no witch. And there never will be again, I promise." That night, for the first time since he found her, Sophia allowed Richard to hug her before she went to sleep, a small gesture that meant the world. As Richard monitored Sophia's recovery, Edward prepared for the approaching legal confrontation. The case was almost ready to be formally presented, with an overwhelming amount of evidence against Camilla. The strategy was clear. First, secure full and final custody of Sophia for Richard. Second, sue Camilla civilly and criminally for the abuse and misappropriation of funds. Camilla, for her part, was not idle. After weeks of unsuccessfully trying to find out Richard and Sophia's whereabouts, she had hired her own lawyers and begun to build an alternative narrative. Through her public relations team, she discreetly planted stories in the media that portrayed her as a dedicated stepmother, concerned for her stepdaughter's well-being, while insinuating that Richard was an absent father who had kidnapped his own daughter during an episode of emotional instability. "She's setting the stage for a public battle," Edward observed, showing Richard some of the articles that were beginning to circulate on gossip blogs and society columns, "trying to win public sympathy before our case comes to light." "What do we do?" Richard asked. "For now, nothing. Let her waste energy on these PR stunts. Our focus remains on building the strongest possible case. When the time is right, we will present the evidence, and no media campaign will be able to overcome the impact of the truth." However, Edward's team was not completely passive. They had discreetly established contact with Mariah Price, a respected investigative journalist known for her integrity and for exposing corruption schemes involving powerful figures. After reviewing some of the evidence under a confidentiality agreement, Mariah agreed to prepare an in-depth report on the case to be published when the legal proceedings began. "Public opinion is important, but the truth is more important," Edward told Richard. "And the truth in this case is so clear and well documented that not even Camilla's best spin doctors will be able to distort it for long." As the case neared its decisive moment, a new development brought more complexity to the situation. Lucy Campbell, a close friend of Camilla's who regularly visited the Morgan mansion, voluntarily approached Edward, consumed by guilt after learning about the state in which Sophia had been found. "I knew something was wrong," Lucy confessed during her interview with Edward and an investigator. "I noticed how tense Sophia would get whenever Camilla entered the room, how she would flinch when her stepmother spoke to her. But Camilla always had an explanation, that Sophia was difficult, manipulative, that she had emotional problems inherited from her mother." Lucy recounted a specific incident that had deeply disturbed her. During a lunch at the mansion about 2 months earlier, she had stepped out to take a call and inadvertently overheard Camilla on the phone in the adjacent office. She was laughing, telling someone she had sent the brat for a walk so she could have some peace. "At the time, I didn't fully understand the context, but I remember finding her tone strange. When I returned to the room, I asked about Sophia, and Camilla casually said she was having some reflection time in the garden. It was a hot day, over 90 degrees. Lucy admitted, with evident shame, that she hadn't questioned the situation further at the time. "I should have said something, done something, but Camilla has this way of making you doubt what you see or hear, of making everything seem normal even when it's not." Lucy's testimony was particularly valuable because she was not an employee who could be accused of having resentful motives. She was a close friend of Camilla's, someone from the same social circle, whose decision to speak had been motivated purely by conscience. "This further strengthens our case," Edward commented after the interview. "It shows a consistent pattern of behavior, confirmed not only by employees but also by people in Camilla's personal life." As the case solidified, Richard became increasingly aware of how much he had failed his daughter in recent years, not just by trusting Camilla, but by emotionally distancing himself, by prioritizing business over fatherhood. Guilt was a constant companion, but he was determined not to let it paralyze his actions. Instead, he channeled that energy into his transformation as a father. For the first time since Beatrice's death, he was truly present in Sophia's life. He learned about her preferences, her fears, her small daily achievements. He discovered the person his daughter was becoming, despite everything she had faced. "Daddy?" Sophia called one night, as Richard tucked her in after her bedtime story. "Yes, Princess. We're going to be okay, right?" The question, so simple and yet so complex, made Richard's heart ache. In those large, serious eyes, still marked by the shadows of trauma, he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. "Yes, Sophia," he replied, with all the certainty he could muster. "We are going to be okay, I promise." And for the first time, he truly believed it. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be quick. The road ahead included legal battles, public exposure, and the ongoing process of emotional healing. But together, father and daughter were slowly rebuilding what had been broken, piece by piece, day by day. As Sophia fell asleep, clinging to her worn-out teddy bear, Richard watched her rhythmic breathing, making his own silent promise. The corporate empire he had built with such dedication could wait. Now, his greatest construction, his true legacy, would be the rebuilding of this relationship he had almost lost forever. The court hearing was set for a Thursday. In the weeks leading up to it, the tension grew exponentially. Camilla intensified her public relations campaign, appearing on television shows as the victim of a controlling husband who had kidnapped the stepdaughter she loved like her own. Carefully rehearsed tears, fabricated stories about Richard's emotional instability, insinuations about his obsession with work, all part of a strategy to shape public opinion. "Let her talk," Edward advised when Richard, furious, showed him Camilla's interview on Denver's top morning show. "Every public statement she makes now will become evidence against her when we present the facts." The strategy was clear. While Camilla sought the court of public opinion, Richard's team was building an impeccable case for the actual court. The evidence was organized, the witnesses prepared, the experts ready to testify. A meticulously orchestrated legal choreography designed to expose the truth hidden behind the perfect facade of the Morgan family. Mariah Price, the investigative journalist, had completed her extensive reporting and was only waiting for the formal start of the proceedings to publish her story. The material was devastating. Detailed testimonies, financial analyses, edited clips from the security videos, opinions from child psychology experts. The raw, undeniable truth about what Sophia had suffered, presented with the journalistic rigor that was Mariah's trademark. "This is going to explode like a bombshell," Edward predicted after reviewing the material. "There will be no way for Camilla to recover her reputation after this." But for Richard, the media battle was secondary. His priority remained Sophia's well-being and preparing her for what was to come. Following Marian's recommendations, he explained to his daughter, in terms appropriate for her age, what would happen at the hearing. "We're going to talk to a very important judge," he explained, as Sophia drew at her easel. "He's going to listen to our story and the story of her. Then he will decide that you will stay with me forever, and that she can't hurt you anymore." Sophia continued drawing in silence for a few moments. On the paper, two figures holding hands emerged, clearly her and her father, walking away from a dark house with windows that looked like angry eyes. "Will I have to see the witch?" she finally asked, without taking her eyes off the drawing. Richard exchanged a look with Marian, who was present for this conversation. The psychologist gave a slight negative shake of her head. "No, Princess," Richard replied. "You don't have to see her. Other people will tell the judge what happened. And I will be there to speak for you too." "What if the judge doesn't believe us?" Sophia insisted, now adding dark clouds over the house in the drawing. "He will believe us," Richard assured her, kneeling beside her. "We have a lot of proof, a lot of people who saw what happened and will tell the truth. And most importantly, I will never let you go back there, no matter what, I promise." Sophia stopped drawing and looked directly at Richard, her eyes showing a maturity forced by suffering. "Do you really promise? Not even if you have an important meeting or a trip?" The question hit Richard like a physical blow. It was a direct reference to the countless times he had prioritized work, leaving her in Camilla's care. "I really promise, Sophia. Nothing is more important than you. Nothing." For the first time since he had found her on that rainy night, Richard saw a genuine smile on his daughter's face, small and hesitant, but undeniably there. On the eve of the hearing, the tension reached its peak when Camilla, in a desperate move, played her last card. Through her lawyers, she filed a complaint against Richard, accusing him of parental alienation and of manipulating Sophia against her. The petition requested a psychological evaluation of the child, suggesting that her testimony or any statement made to health professionals had been induced by Richard. "A predictable move," commented Edward upon receiving the notification. "She's trying to cast doubt on the main emotional element of our case, Sophia's trauma, but this only shows desperation." "What if it works?" Richard asked, worried. "It won't," the lawyer assured him. "We have independent psychological evaluations conducted by renowned professionals. We have the medical records from the hospital, and most importantly, we have the objective evidence, the videos, the testimonies, the financial records. The attempt to discredit Sophia will only make Camilla look guiltier." On the morning of the hearing, Richard woke before sunrise. He had slept poorly, haunted by nightmares of losing Sophia again. He found her already awake, sitting on her bed with her teddy bear, staring out the window. "Good morning." "Princess," he said softly. "Did you sleep well?" Sophia shook her head. "I dreamed the witch found me." Richard sat beside her, gently placing an arm around her shoulders. "It was just a nightmare. You're safe here with me." "It's today, right?" she asked, referring to the hearing Richard had explained. "Yes, it's today. But you don't have to worry about anything. You'll stay here with Auntie Anne," he said, referring to the educational therapist hired to stay with Sophia during his absence. "You'll do lots of fun things, and when I get back, we'll celebrate with that chocolate ice cream you like." Sophia nodded, still serious. Then, to Richard's surprise, she held out the teddy bear to him. "Take Tico with you. He's brave." Richard felt a lump in his throat. That bear was Sophia's security object, her constant companion through all the trauma. Offering it, even temporarily, was a gesture of profound trust. "Are you sure, Princess? I know how important Tico is to you." Sophia nodded with conviction. "He'll protect you from the witch." With tears in his eyes, Richard accepted the bear. "Thank you, Sophia. I'll take very good care of him, and he'll help me be strong like you." Hours later, Richard found himself in a courtroom at the Denver County Courthouse. The room was austere, with dark wood paneling and the imposing seal of the state behind the judge's bench. On one side, Richard and Edward, accompanied by their legal team. On the other, Camilla and her lawyers, all wearing confident expressions, as if they had already secured victory. When Camilla entered, she shot Richard a disdainful look. She was impeccably dressed and made up, the perfect image of the wronged socialite she had been portraying in the media. For a brief moment, her eyes landed on the teddy bear Richard was holding discreetly, and a flicker of recognition, followed by something akin to hatred, crossed her face. Judge Marcus Brandon, a middle-aged man with a stern expression and sharp eyes, began the session. The initial formalities were quickly concluded, and the lawyers for both parties presented their opening statements. Camilla's team painted a picture of an absent and later vengeful father who had kidnapped his daughter and manipulated her against her dedicated stepmother. The narrative was well constructed, but lacked substance behind the emotional rhetoric. When it was Edward's turn, his approach was completely different. Without flourish or emotional appeals, he methodically presented the facts. The medical reports detailing Sophia's physical state when she was found, the testimonies of former employees, the financial analyses showing the systematic misappropriation of funds, and, most devastatingly, carefully selected excerpts from the security videos. The images were disturbing in their banal cruelty. Sophia being locked in her room for hours, Camilla denying her food as punishment for minor infractions, the girl being forced to stay in the garden during a storm while Camilla watched from the window. The courtroom remained in absolute silence as the scenes unfolded, interrupted only by occasional gasps of outrage. Camilla's face gradually lost its studied composure. When the lights came on again, she was visibly pale, conferring urgently with her lawyers, who seemed equally shaken. Judge Brandon maintained his neutral expression throughout the presentation, but the rigidity of his posture betrayed its impact. "The court will request full copies of these videos for detailed analysis," he declared. "Proceed with the witnesses." Mrs. Vera was the first to testify. With simple dignity and direct honesty, the former housekeeper described the pattern of abuse she had witnessed. Her testimony was particularly impactful because it came from someone who had lived in the house daily for years. "The girl was treated like a nuisance," Mrs. Vera reported, not hiding her emotion. "In the beginning, when Mr. Morgan was home, Mrs. Camilla would feign affection, but as soon as he traveled, it was as if Sophia became invisible, or worse, a target for all of her stepmother's frustration." Camilla's lawyer tried to discredit the testimony, suggesting Mrs. Vera held a grudge for being fired, but the 62-year-old woman stood firm, even presenting a notebook where she had secretly recorded dates and incidents, anticipating that it might one day be necessary. "I couldn't do much to protect the little one," she explained, "but I thought I could at least keep the truth for when it was needed." One by one, the other former employees presented their stories, each reinforcing the same pattern. Teresa, the cook, described how she was forbidden to feed Sophia properly. George, the gardener, recounted the numerous times he found the girl hiding in the garden, trying to escape her stepmother's fury. David, the driver, confirmed Camilla's orders to leave Sophia at school hours before classes started and pick her up as late as possible. The most surprising testimony, however, came from Lucy Campbell, Camilla's personal friend. Her account of the phone call where Camilla laughed about having sent the brat for a walk caused a murmur of shock in the room. "Why did you decide to testify against your friend?" the judge asked. Lucy hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. "Because I couldn't live with myself knowing what I know and doing nothing. I already failed once by not questioning what I saw. I can't fail again." Camilla, who until then had maintained a composed appearance despite her growing pallor, couldn't contain an expression of betrayal upon hearing her friend's testimony. Her gaze, when it met Lucy's, was filled with fury. The next stage was the expert reports. Dr. Caroline Stevens, the pediatrician who had initially treated Sophia, presented a detailed report on the girl's physical condition: malnutrition, anemia, bruises in various stages of healing, all consistent with a pattern of prolonged neglect. Marion Tran, Sophia's psychologist, discussed the emotional aspects of the trauma. Without violating the confidentiality of their sessions, she explained the behavioral patterns indicative of psychological abuse: constant fear, difficulty trusting, food-related anxiety, a tendency to hide. Sophia exhibits all the classic signs of a child who has lived in an emotionally abusive environment, Marion concluded. Her recovery has been slow and will require ongoing and consistent support. The forensic accountant presented his analysis of the financial records, demonstrating how Camilla had systematically siphoned funds from Sophia's trust to finance her personal resort project. "We are not talking about accounting errors or mismanagement," Leonard explained. This was a calculated operation executed over several years, with falsified documentation to mask the true nature of the transactions. As the evidence mounted, Camilla's defense strategy began to crumble. Her lawyers, realizing the gravity of the situation, changed tactics, now trying to minimize her responsibility and suggest that the accusations were exaggerated. At the end of the session, Judge Brandon requested closing arguments. Camilla's lawyer made a desperate attempt at salvation, arguing that even if some disciplinary excess had occurred, it did not justify a complete loss of contact with the child. He suggested that with family therapy and supervision, Camilla could maintain some kind of relationship with her stepdaughter. Edward, in his closing argument, was direct and relentless. "Your Honor, what we have seen today was not just a case of disciplinary excess," he declared, his calm voice carrying a controlled indignation. "It was a systematic pattern of abuse, both emotional and physical, perpetrated against a vulnerable child by someone who was supposed to protect her. Furthermore, there was the criminal misappropriation of financial resources intended for this same child's well-being. We request not only full and final custody for the father, Richard Morgan, but also a permanent restraining order against Camilla Morgan, in addition to the complete restitution of the embezzled funds, with interest and monetary correction." Judge Brandon listened intently, making occasional notes. When the arguments were concluded, he announced that he would retire to deliberate virtue, but that given the extraordinary nature of the evidence presented, he was prepared to issue a preliminary ruling later that day. During the recess, Richard remained in the courtroom, holding Sophia's teddy bear like a talisman. Edward, sitting beside him, reviewed his notes, occasionally consulting with other members of the legal team. Across the room, Camilla seemed to have aged years in a few hours. Her confident posture had completely disappeared, replaced by a palpable tension as she conferred urgently with her lawyers. Occasionally, she cast furtive glances at Richard, a mixture of hatred and fear in her eyes. After nearly 2 hours, Judge Brandon returned to the room. The silence that fell was almost physical in its intensity. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, the judge began, his deep voice echoing in the room. "This court is convinced that Sophia Morgan was subjected to a consistent pattern of neglect and emotional abuse under the care of Camilla Morgan. The medical, testimonial, and documentary evidence is conclusive and disturbing." Richard felt a wave of relief begin to form, but he held back, waiting for the conclusion. "Therefore, I grant full and final custody of Sophia Morgan to her father, Richard Morgan. Additionally, I am issuing a permanent restraining order, prohibiting Camilla Morgan from approaching or attempting to contact the minor within 500 yards. As for the financial matters, I order a full audit of the accounts related to Sophia's trust fund, with the objective of determining the exact amount embezzled for restitution." A murmur went through the room, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. "Furthermore, I am forwarding copies of all evidence presented today to the district attorney's office, so that the possibility of criminal proceedings against Camilla Morgan for child abuse, neglect and embezzlement may be evaluated. This session is adjourned." The gavel struck again, sealing the decision. Edward squeezed Richard's shoulder in a rare display of emotion. "We won," he said simply. Across the room, Camilla appeared to be in a state of shock. Her face, once carefully made up, was streaked with tears that had left dark trails of mascara. When her eyes met Richard's, there was no more fury, only a belated understanding that her carefully constructed world had completely fallen apart. As they left the courthouse, Richard noticed a group of journalists waiting at the entrance. Among them, he recognized Mariah Price, the investigative reporter. She gave a discreet nod, indicating that the story would be published soon, as agreed. "Do you want to make a statement?" Edward asked, noticing the reporters. Richard thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No. What matters now is getting back to Sophia and telling her everything is okay. The rest can wait." The ride back to the apartment in Washington Park was silent. Richard alternated between a contained euphoria over the victory and a somber reflection on everything that had happened. How had they come to this point? How had he allowed his daughter to suffer for so long without realizing it? The guilt was still there, probably always would be, but now it was accompanied by a renewed determination to do things differently. When he arrived at the apartment, he found Sophia and Anne, the educational therapist, assembling a puzzle in the living room. Upon seeing him, the girl stood up hesitantly, her eyes immediately searching for the teddy bear in his hands. "It's okay, Princess," Richard said, kneeling to be at her level. "The judge said you're going to stay with me forever, and that she can't come near you anymore." Sophia's face lit up with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Never again. Never again," Richard confirmed, handing back the teddy bear. "Tico helped me be brave, just like you said he would." Sophia hugged the bear tightly, then in a gesture that took Richard completely by surprise, she stepped forward and hugged him too. It was the first hug she had initiated since he had found her on that rainy night. Richard wrapped his arms around her gently, feeling the tears he had held back all day finally escape. "I love you, Sophia," he whispered. "I love you too, Daddy," she replied, the words almost inaudible against his chest. In the following weeks, the story of the Morgan family became public through Mariah Price's report. The reaction was immediate and intense. Camilla, already facing the legal consequences of her actions, found herself condemned in the court of public opinion she had tried so hard to manipulate. Her social connections evaporated. Her positions on charity boards were revoked. Her public appearances became impossible in the face of the wave of repudiation. The Bella Vista Resort, the project that had motivated part of her actions, had its construction halted when investors, fearing association with the scandal, withdrew their support. Marcus Thorne, the lover with whom Camilla had planned her future, quickly disappeared when the tide turned, denying any knowledge of her actions. For Richard, however, these developments were secondary. His attention was entirely focused on Sophia's recovery and well-being. Following Marion's recommendations, he had established a new routine for them both, prioritizing stability, security, and moments of genuine connection. The therapy sessions continued, now supplemented by activities that helped Sophia rebuild her confidence and self-esteem. Swimming lessons, where she gradually overcame her fear of water. Weekly playdates with carefully selected children, where she slowly relearned how to socialize. Daily moments dedicated exclusively to her. With no phones, no laptops, no distractions, just father and daughter, reconnecting. Edward had suggested a lawsuit for emotional distress against Camilla, but Richard chose not to pursue that path. "Money won't heal what Sophia went through," he explained, "and I don't want to prolong this any more than necessary. I just want to move on, build something new." InfoCorp America, surprisingly, not only survived the partial absence of its founder, but thrived under the distributed leadership Richard had been forced to implement. This revelation led to a permanent restructuring of the company, allowing Richard to maintain an active role in strategic aspects while delegating daily operations, creating the work-life balance that had been missing for so long. 3 months after the court decision, Richard and Sophia moved from the temporary apartment in Washington Park to a house in the country club neighborhood. It wasn't as large as the mansion in Cherry Creek, but it was spacious, welcoming, and, most importantly, filled exclusively with positive memories. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, while Richard was preparing a barbecue in the garden and Sophia was playing with her new dog, a rescue mix she had named Valor, the phone rang. It was Marion, calling to confirm the session for the following week. "How is she?" the psychologist asked. Richard watched his daughter running through the garden, her laughter echoing in the afternoon air. Better every day. We still have our difficult moments, but they're becoming rarer. And the nightmares. 2 weeks without an episode, Richard replied, unable to contain the pride in his voice. And yesterday, she did something incredible. She put Tico on the shelf before going to sleep, said she didn't need him in bed because she wasn't scared anymore, and that's significant progress, Marion commented. It represents a huge increase in her sense of security. After hanging up, Richard returned his attention to the barbecue, reflecting on the journey they had taken. There was still a long road ahead. He knew that. Sophia would carry the scars of her experience for a long time, perhaps forever. But now those scars were being accompanied by new, positive, and strengthening memories. That night, after putting Sophia to bed with the usual bedtime story, Richard sat on the porch with a glass of wine, contemplating the stars over Denver. The thought of how he had almost lost his daughter still caused a physical pain, a tightness in his chest that constantly reminded him of what truly mattered. The lesson had been harsh, almost devastating, but clear in its simplicity. No professional success, no business achievement, no hefty bank account could ever replace the time and attention dedicated to those who truly mattered. Richard's true legacy would not be Infocore America or any other company he might build. It would be Sophia, and the person she would become thanks to the love and security he was now committed to providing. In the next room, Sophia slept peacefully, without nightmares, without fear. The teddy bear Tico rested on the shelf, still important but no longer essential, a silent symbol of a journey of survival, resilience, and finally, healing. And so, in that house illuminated by the soft Colorado moonlight, father and daughter continued their journey of reconstruction, one day at a time, one moment at a time, moving forward, together, finally and forever. 18 months had passed since that decisive court hearing. Denver was experiencing a mild autumn, with cool mornings and sunny afternoons that painted the city with a golden light characteristic of the season. At the house in the country club neighborhood, Richard and Sophia Morgan's routine had finally found a balance that neither had ever experienced before. On that Saturday morning, Sophia, now almost 9 years old, was focused on her new hobby, cultivating a small herb garden in the backyard. With the help of Mrs. Antonia, the new housekeeper who had won her trust with infinite patience, the girl had planted basil, mint, rosemary, and other herbs that were beginning to sprout in their colorful pots. "Look, Dad, the basil is already this big," Sophia exclaimed, showing with her fingers the height of the small plant that was growing vigorously under her care. Richard, who was finishing preparing breakfast in the kitchen overlooking the garden, smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. Sophia's transformation over those months was something that still moved him deeply. The scared, silent girl had gradually given way to a child who was smiling again, expressing herself, trusting. "It's looking beautiful, Princess," he replied, stepping out into the yard with a tray of freshly baked scones. "Soon we can use them in our recipes." Sophia smiled, a genuine smile that now appeared with increasing frequency. "Mrs. Antonia said that when the rosemary grows, we can make that chicken I like." Richard placed the tray on the garden table and came closer to get a better look at the little plants. It had been Marion's idea, Sophia's psychologist. To start this activity, caring for plants can be therapeutic, she had explained. It teaches about patience, care, and most importantly, gives her a sense of control and accomplishment that was taken from her during the traumatic period. Like many of Marion's suggestions, this one had worked wonderfully. Sophia dedicated herself to the garden with a mix of concentration and affection, religiously watering each plant, observing each new sprout with genuine joy. "Royce, let's have breakfast," Richard invited. "Afterward, we can go to Washington Park if you want. It's a beautiful day for a bike ride." Sophia nodded enthusiastically. Saturday bike rides had become a tradition, part of the new life they were building together. It was during these moments that she opened up the most, talking about school, her newly made friends, her thoughts. While they ate breakfast, Richard discreetly watched his daughter. The physical signs of trauma had long since disappeared. Her cheeks were full again. The sparkle had returned to her eyes. Her body had regained a healthy weight. The emotional scars, however, still manifested occasionally. A sudden startle at an unexpected noise, a moment of withdrawal when meeting new people, a sporadic nightmare that would wake her up crying. But even these manifestations were becoming increasingly rare. The consistent work with Marion, now reduced to a bi-weekly session, had given Sophia tools to process the trauma and move forward. The stability of their new family routine and, above all, Richard's constant and attentive presence completed the healing process. "Dad," Sophia said suddenly, pulling Richard from his thoughts, "I got an invitation from Julia to go to her house next week. There's going to be a sleepover with 3 other girls from our class." Richard noticed the mix of excitement and apprehension in his daughter's voice. It was the first invitation for a sleepover at a friend's house since everything had happened. A new step, a new challenge. "That's great, Sophia," he replied, keeping his voice casual so as not to increase her anxiety. "Do you want to go?" Sophia bit her lip, thoughtful. "I want to. But what if I have a nightmare in front of the other girls? Or if I get scared in the middle of the night?" Richard reached across the table, gently touching his daughter's hand. "It's normal to be nervous, Princess. But remember what Marion always says, small steps one at a time. If you want to try, I can take you and be on standby in case you need to come home at any time. Promise you'll answer if I call?" she asked, still unsure. "I promise." "Even if it's at 3 in the morning," Richard assured her, squeezing her hand lightly. "And if you just want to go for a few hours and come home to sleep, that's okay too." Sophia seemed to ponder for a moment, then nodded. "I think I want to try. Julia is nice, and her mum makes really good brownies." Richard smiled, feeling that familiar wave of pride. Every new step, every small victory for Sophia was celebrated silently in his heart. "Then it's a plan." After breakfast, they headed to Washington Park with their bikes. The park, one of Denver's green lungs, was full of families enjoying the sunny day. Sophia pedaled ahead, her hair blowing in the wind, occasionally looking back to make sure her father was following. During a break for water near the lake, Richard received a call from Edward, his lawyer and now close friend. "Richard," Edward's voice sounded urgent, "we need to talk. There are new developments in the case." Richard felt a knot in his stomach. The case, as they both referred to it, had been officially closed for over a year. Camilla had been convicted of embezzlement and child abuse, receiving a 3-year sentence converted to community service and an ankle monitor, in addition to the restitution of the embezzled funds. The restraining order remained in effect, ensuring she could not approach Sophia or Richard. "Did something serious happen?" Richard asked, stepping a few feet away so Sophia, who was feeding the ducks, wouldn't overhear. "Not exactly serious, but it's important. I'd rather not talk over the phone. Can we meet at my office on Monday?" "Of course," Richard agreed, intrigued and slightly apprehensive. "Is 10 a.m. good?" "Perfect. And Richard, try not to worry until then." "It's nothing that threatens your safety." Edward's assurance partially calmed Richard, but it didn't stop unsettling thoughts from surfacing over the rest of the weekend. What could have happened? Had Camilla violated the restraining order? Was she trying some legal appeal? Or was it something related to the criminal case, still ongoing in some instances? He tried not to let these worries contaminate his time with Sophia. They continued their ride, then went to the movies to see the animated film she had been eager to watch, and ended the day with homemade pizza, prepared together in the kitchen, another ritual they had established. On Monday, after dropping Sophia off at school, a different institution from the previous one, where no one knew her history and she could start fresh without the weight of the past, Richard drove to Edward's office in downtown Denver. The lawyer received him with his usual professional composure, but Richard immediately noticed an underlying tension in his demeanor. "What's going on, Edward? You're making me worried." Edward gestured to the chair in front of his desk and sat down, organizing some papers. "I received a call from Marcella Viana, a social worker from Child Protective Services. She's handling a case that, well, that has a connection to you." "What do you mean?" Richard asked, confused. Edward took a deep breath before continuing. "Camilla gave birth 3 weeks ago. A girl. The news hit Richard like a punch to the gut. What? She was pregnant? With whom? Apparently, with Marcus Thorne, that investor she was having an affair with, but he denied paternity and disappeared off the map. Richard processed the information slowly, feeling a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. And why does this affect us? Why is CPS involved? Edward paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. Camilla is not in a condition to care for the child. Since the conviction, she's lost practically everything. Money, social status, family support. She's living in a small apartment in a suburb, surviving on what's left of her family inheritance, and apparently, she developed severe depression during the pregnancy, which worsened after the birth. I still don't see how this affects us, Richard insisted, though a premonition was already beginning to form. The baby has been temporarily placed in a shelter, while Camilla receives psychiatric treatment, Edward explained. As part of the protocol, CPS is looking for relatives who might take temporary custody of the child, and legally, even with the divorce finalized, you are still considered a relative by affinity, since you were married to Camilla for years. Richard stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, Denver went about its normal rhythm, oblivious to the turmoil forming inside that office. They expect me? Us? He couldn't even finish the question. No one is expecting anything, Edward clarified quickly. Marcella contacted me only to inform me of the situation and to ask if there was any possibility, considering the immediate alternative is for the child to remain in the shelter until Camilla's situation is resolved or a foster family is found. Richard closed his eyes, trying to organize his thoughts. The idea was absurd. How could they consider him taking in the child of Camilla, the woman who had traumatized his daughter, who had betrayed his trust in every possible way? The answer is no, he said finally, turning back to Edward. I can't do this. Not for Sophia, not for myself. We've been through too much. We're finally building something solid. Bringing this child into our lives would be reliving everything all over again. Edward nodded, understanding. I completely understand, Richard. And legally, you have no obligation whatsoever. I will communicate your decision to Marcella, and the matter will be closed for us. Richard sat down again, suddenly exhausted. I feel for the child, I really do. She's not to blame for anything. But I can't sacrifice Sophia's well-being. Not after everything she's been through. No one can judge your decision, Edward assured him. You have every right to protect your family. Leaving the office, Richard felt uneasy, torn between the certainty that he was making the right decision and a nagging feeling that something was left unfinished. He decided to take a walk through Washington Park before returning to work, needing time to process the news. Sitting on a bench in the shade of a large oak tree, he watched the children playing on the playground. Complete families, grandparents with their grandchildren, nannies supervising their little charges, common scenes of a normal day that now seemed laden with meaning. A newborn baby girl, with no fault of her own, the daughter of the woman who had nearly destroyed his family, now in an institutional shelter. The irony of the situation did not escape him. Less than 2 years ago, it was Sophia who was vulnerable, desperately in need of protection and care. But the situation was completely different, he argued with himself. Sophia was his daughter. This child had no relation to him other than being his ex-wife's daughter. Taking her in would be introducing an element of chaos into a life that was finally finding balance. And yet, Richard's phone rang, interrupting his conflicting thoughts. It was Marion, Sophia's psychologist. Richard, I'm calling to confirm our session tomorrow, she said. I also wanted to comment on Sophia's remarkable progress over the last week. Her teacher sent me a very positive report about her participation in class. Richard smiled, feeling that familiar pride warm his chest. She's really doing well. She even accepted an invitation to a sleepover at a friend's house. That's excellent, Marion exclaimed. How it shows a significant increase in her sense of security and confidence. The work you two have done together is really paying off. After hanging up, Richard remained seated, watching the clouds drift slowly across the blue Denver sky. Sophia was getting better, stronger, more secure every day. Would it be fair to risk that progress? The afternoon was already advancing when he finally returned to InfoCorps America. He dove into work, trying to push the matter from his mind, but the questions persisted, echoing in the corners of his conscience. When he picked up Sophia from school, he was greeted with an enthusiastic hug and a non-stop stream of stories about her day, her friends, the science class where they had learned about the water cycle. Her energy and joy were contagious, so far from the silent, fearful child of before. During dinner, as Sophia recounted more of her day, Richard watched her with renewed attention. The path they had traveled together, the difficulties overcome, the trust rebuilt. All of it seemed even more precious in light of the news he had received that morning. "Dad, are you listening to me?" Sophia asked, noticing his distraction. "Sorry, Princess. I'm a little tired today," Richard replied, forcing a smile. "What were you saying?" "That in class today, Mrs. Lewis talked about different families. That not all families are the same. Some have a mom and a dad. Some just a dad or just a mum. Some have two mums or two dads. And that the important thing is to have love and care." Richard felt something tighten in his chest. "And what did you think of that?" Sophia shrugged, with that childlike simplicity that sometimes held more wisdom than many adult speeches. "I thought it was cool. Our family is just the two of us and Valor, but it's a good one." "Right? It's a very good one," Richard confirmed, reaching out to stroke his daughter's face. "Are you happy like this, Sophia?" "I am," she replied, and then added after a thoughtful pause, "But sometimes, when I see Julia with her little brother, I think it must be nice to have someone else." Sophia's casual statement hit Richard like a revelation. He had never considered that she might miss a larger family structure. Since Beatrice's death, when Sophia was only 2, it had always been the two of them, and then briefly the 3 of them when Camilla entered their lives, with disastrous results. "Would you like to have a brother or sister?" Richard asked, trying to sound casual, though his heart was beating rapidly. Sophia seemed to consider the question seriously. "I think so. A little baby brother would be cool. I could teach him things. Like you teach me." The conversation soon drifted to other topics, the book they were reading together, plans for the weekend, Valor's performance in obedience class. But Sophia's words stayed with Richard, echoing and expanding like ripples in a pond. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, Richard sat in his home office, staring at the blank computer screen. Almost without realizing it, he began researching adoption, temporary guardianship, foster care, concepts he had never seriously considered before. The hours passed as he absorbed information, statistics, personal accounts. At one point, he found himself looking at his phone, Edward's number saved in his recent calls. It was too late to call, surely. The matter could wait until the morning, or it could be forgotten entirely. After all, he hadn't made any decision. He was just exploring possibilities. Carried away by a casual conversation with a 9-year-old. But then, Richard remembered the teddy bear. Tico, Sophia's faithful companion during her darkest times, now rested on a shelf in her room. He hadn't been discarded, just no longer needed as before. The girl had grown evolved, found enough security not to constantly depend on that symbol of comfort. Sophia was healing, getting stronger every day. Strong enough, perhaps, to face new challenges, to open her heart to new possibilities, just as he would need to do. With a deep sigh, Richard picked up the phone and dialed. "Edward, sorry to call so late, but I need you to contact the social worker from CPS. I want to meet the child." The next morning, Richard sat down with Sophia for a serious, age-appropriate but honest conversation. He explained about the baby, Camilla's daughter, who was in a shelter with no one to care for her. "Jay, like when we found Valor at the animal shelter?" Sophia asked, making the immediate connection. "Something like that." "Yes," Richard confirmed, impressed by his daughter's understanding. "She's not to blame for anything that happened, just like you weren't." Sophia was silent for a moment, processing the information. Is Camilla her mother?" Richard noticed how Sophia still avoided saying her former stepmother's name, preferring the witch nickname she had created during her traumatic period. It was one of the few remaining signs of her past suffering. "Yes," Richard confirmed, "but the baby isn't to blame for that. and Camilla can't take care of her right now. And you want us to take care of her? Sophia asked, surprising Richard with her perception. I was thinking about it, he admitted, but only if you want to as well. It's a decision we need to make together. As a family. Sophia bit her lip, thoughtful, a gesture Richard recognized as a sign she was taking the situation very seriously. Could she be dangerous? She finally asked. Could she be mean like her mother? Richard sat beside his daughter, putting an arm around her shoulders. No, Sophia. She's just a baby. Babies aren't born good or bad. They just need love and care to grow up healthy and happy. Like a little plant? Sophia asked, drawing an analogy to her herb garden. Exactly like a little plant, Richard agreed, smiling at the perfect comparison. With the right care, she can grow up strong and healthy. Sophia still seemed to be processing the idea, weighing the implications with a seriousness that at times seemed beyond her years, a maturity forced by the difficult circumstances she had faced. Can we meet her first? She finally asked. Yes, we can, Richard replied, feeling an unexpected sense of relief. It wasn't a definitive yes, but it was an opening, a willingness to consider the possibility. We'll meet her and then decide, no rush. 2 days later, Richard and Sophia were at the Hope Shelter, a city-run institution located in a renovated mansion in a central neighborhood. The place was clean and well-kept, but inevitably institutional. No matter how good the intentions and efforts of the staff, it lacked the warmth of a real home. Marcella Viana, the social worker who had contacted Edward, met them at the entrance. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an air of quiet efficiency. Thank you for coming, she said, leading them down a hallway decorated with children's drawings. Little Clara is in the nursery. She's only 3 weeks old, but she's a very calm baby, considering the circumstances. Clara, Richard repeated. Camilla named her before... Actually, no, Marcella explained. The staff here gave her a temporary name. When a child arrives without a registered name, we need to identify them somehow. They arrived at the nursery, a spacious room with several cribs, most of them empty at that moment. At the back of the room, a staff member was rocking a small bundle in a pink blanket. This is Mrs. Irene, one of our caregivers, Marcella introduced. And this is Clara. The staff member smiled gently and approached, allowing Richard and Sophia to see the baby in her arms. Clara was tiny, with a dark fuzz covering her head and surprisingly chubby cheeks for a premature baby. She was sleeping soundly, her mouth making occasional sucking motions in her dream. Richard felt a wave of conflicting emotions as he looked at Camilla's daughter. Part of him expected to feel some kind of rejection, some negative association with the woman who had caused so much suffering to his family. But all he saw was an innocent child, completely vulnerable and dependent on the adults around her, just as Sophia had been. Beside him, Sophia watched the baby with intense curiosity. After a few moments of silent contemplation, she whispered, "She's so tiny." "Would you like to hold her?" Mrs. Irene offered. Sophia looked at her father, uncertain. Richard nodded encouragingly, and the girl sat in the chair indicated by the caregiver. With gentle instructions on how to support the head and hold the fragile little body, Sophia soon had Clara in her arms, watching her with a mixture of fascination and caution. "Hi, Clara," she whispered. "I'm Sophia." At that moment, as if responding to the introduction, the baby briefly opened her eyes, dark and still unfocused, before falling back asleep. "She heard me," Sophia declared, amazed. "She knows my name now." Richard watched the scene with a lump in his throat, seeing his daughter, who had suffered so much, now carefully rocking the baby, who, without intervention, would face an uncertain fate, was an image that crystallized all the questions he had been struggling with for the past few days. They stayed at the shelter for nearly 2 hours. Sophia, after her initial hesitation, became increasingly interested in the baby, asking Mrs. Irene questions about feeding, bathing, and basic care. Richard spoke with Marcella about the legal procedures for temporary guardianship, the requirements, the follow-up visits. On the way home, Sophia was unusually quiet, looking out the car window with a thoughtful expression. "What did you think of the visit?" Richard finally asked, as they were almost home. Sophia remained silent for a few more moments before answering. She seems lonely. Clara? Yes. There are other people taking care of her, but it's not the same as having a family, right? It's like she's waiting for someone. Richard's heart ached at his daughter's perceptive observation. You're right, Sophia. It's not the same. More silence as they pulled into the garage. When Richard turned off the engine, Sophia finally verbalized the question that had been hanging in the air. Are we going to be her family? Richard turned in his seat to face his daughter. What do you think about that, Sophia? It's a very important decision that will change our lives. Sophia fidgeted with her backpack strap, thoughtful. It's going to be hard, right? Babies cry a lot and need a lot of attention. Yes, that's true, Richard agreed, impressed by his daughter's pragmatism. It would be a big challenge. I'd need help with her care when I'm working. I'd have less free time. Our routine would change a lot. But she has no one, Sophia concluded simply. Like I had no one when you found me. The words struck Richard deeply. In her childlike simplicity, Sophia had touched the heart of the matter. Clara was in a situation of vulnerability and abandonment, similar to what she herself had experienced, though under different circumstances. You had me, Sophia, even if I wasn't there like I should have been, he corrected gently. But I understand what you mean, and you're right. Clara has no one right now. Sophia unbuckled her seatbelt and looked directly at her father. I think we should try, Dad. I know it will be hard, but we've been through hard things before, right? Richard felt his eyes well up at his daughter's compassion and maturity. Of all the possible reactions, this was the one he had least expected, and perhaps the one he should have anticipated most, knowing Sophia's generous heart. Are you sure, Princess? It's a very big decision. Sophia nodded with conviction. I'm sure. No one deserves to be alone. The following week, Richard began the process of obtaining temporary guardianship of Clara. He had chosen this path, rather than permanent adoption, to give everyone involved, including Clara herself when she grew up, the opportunity to evaluate the situation long-term. The process was surprisingly quick, given the special circumstances. The fact that Clara was his ex-wife's daughter, combined with the positive reports on his ability as Sophia's father and his financial and emotional stability, facilitated the approval by the juvenile court. Meanwhile, the house in the country club neighborhood underwent a small revolution. One of the guest rooms was transformed into a nursery, with a crib, changing table, and a delicate decoration in shades of green and yellow, a deliberate choice to avoid the traditional pink that Sophia had associated with princess things the witch liked. Richard hired a nanny specializing in newborns, Janine, who would not only care for Clara during his work hours, but also teach him and Sophia the basics of baby care. Mrs. Antonia, the housekeeper, was enthusiastic about the arrival of the new family member, preparing the house with affectionate efficiency. The news that Richard Morgan, the powerful CEO of Infocor America, was taking custody of his ex-wife's daughter generated an inevitable buzz in Denver's social and business circles. Some questioned his sanity, others praised his altruism, and many speculated about his true motives. Richard ignored all the comments. The only opinion that mattered to him was Sophia's, and she was increasingly excited about the arrival of her little sister, as she had already begun to call Clara. On the eve of the day they would pick up Clara from the shelter, Richard found Sophia in her room, organizing something on the shelf where her most precious books and toys were kept. What are you doing? Princess, Sophia turned, holding the teddy bear Tico, her companion through the difficult times. I think Clara will need him more than I do, she explained, placing the bear inside a decorated bag, so she won't feel lonely when she's scared. Richard felt his heart flood with a love so intense it almost hurt. He knelt to be at his daughter's eye level and hugged her tightly. You're incredible, you know that. The bravest, kindest-hearted person I've ever known. Sophia returned the hug, then pulled away with a serious look. Dad, how are we going to explain to Clara when she's older about her mother? It was a question Richard had also been considering without reaching a definitive answer. We'll have to be honest, Sophia, but in an age-appropriate way. When the time is right, we'll explain that her biological mother wasn't in a position to care for her, and that's why we formed this different kind of family. And about what she did to me, Sophia insisted, touching on the most delicate point. Richard took a deep breath. That's part of our family story too, Sophia. We don't need to hide it, but we also don't need to focus on it. Clara is not to blame for her mother's actions, just as you were not to blame for anything. Sophia seemed satisfied with the answer. Returning to packing her gift bag for Clara, in addition to the bear Tico, she had set aside a small storybook and a colorful rattle she had picked out at the toy store. The next morning, Richard and Sophia arrived early at the Hope Shelter. They were greeted by Marcella and led to the director's office, where they signed the last necessary documents for Clara's release. The judge has approved temporary guardianship for 6 months initially, Marcella explained. During this period, we will make regular follow-up visits. After 6 months, if everything is going well, and I have no doubt it will be, the term can be extended, or we can begin the adoption process, if that is your wish. Finally, the moment came to pick up Clara from the nursery. The little one was awake, curiously watching the colorful mobile hanging over her crib. Mrs. Irene had dressed her in a newly donated outfit, a light yellow, and combed her few dark hairs into a sort of involuntary mohawk that made Sophia giggle. "She looks like a little chick with a spiky crest," the girl exclaimed, approaching the crib with her gift bag. Richard, guided by Mrs. Irene, lifted Clara into his arms. The feeling was simultaneously familiar and strange. It had been so many years since Sophia was this small, this completely dependent. The responsibility was daunting, but also strangely comforting. "Welcome to the family, Clara," he said softly. Sophia came closer, offering the teddy bear to the baby. "I brought Tico for you. He'll protect you when you're scared. He's very good at that." Clara, obviously not understanding the words, but responding to the gentle tone, momentarily fixed her gaze on Sophia before returning to her random contemplation of the new world around her. They said goodbye to the shelter staff, promising to keep in touch and send photos regularly. The ride home was quiet, everyone aware of the significance of the moment. Even Clara seemed to sense the solemnity of the occasion, remaining quiet and attentive in the car seat installed in the back. When they arrived home, they were greeted by Mrs. Antonia and Janine, who had prepared everything for the new member's arrival. Valor, the dog, approached curiously, sniffing the air and wagging his tail in cautious approval of the new pack member. In the days and weeks that followed, the house was filled with the sounds and rhythms of life with a newborn: nightly cries, diaper changes, hastily prepared bottles, stolen naps in moments of silence. Sophia surprised everyone with her dedication as a big sister, helping with the care with an enthusiasm and responsibility beyond her years. Richard, dividing his time between the demands of fatherhood and his professional responsibilities, found a new balance that, although exhausting, brought a deep satisfaction. InfoCorps America continued to thrive under the distributed leadership model he had implemented after the trauma with Sophia, proving that his constant presence in every minor detail was not as essential as he had once believed. 3 months after Clara's arrival, Richard received an unexpected call from Edward. "Camilla is asking about her daughter," the lawyer informed him bluntly. "She has completed her initial psychiatric treatment and is in outpatient follow-up. Her doctor says she is responding well." Richard felt a knot in his stomach. "Does she want custody back?" "Not exactly," Edward replied cautiously. "From what I understand, she recognizes that she's not in a position to take on the child right now, but she has expressed a desire to know how Clara is, perhaps even see her eventually." "That's not going to happen," Richard declared, his tone categorical. "The restraining order is still valid. She can't come near Sophia, and now Clara is under my guardianship." "Legally, you are correct," Edward agreed. "The restraining order related to Sophia remains in effect and extends to your residence and the places you and Sophia frequent. But regarding Clara, the situation is more complex. Camilla is still the biological mother, and she could eventually request visitation rights, especially if she continues treatment and shows significant improvement." Richard sat down, feeling the weight of the situation. "What do you advise?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "As your lawyer, I'd say you have solid legal grounds to deny any contact at this time. The restraining order related to Sophia, combined with the crimes for which Camilla was convicted, give you strong arguments. But, Richard prompted, sensing the hesitation, but as your friend, I suggest thinking long-term. Clara will grow up, she'll ask questions, she'll want to know about her origins. An absolute refusal now could complicate the situation in the future. Perhaps there's a middle ground. Information about the child's well-being shared through third parties, for example. Without direct contact. The conversation left Richard unsettled. That night, after putting Sophia to bed and checking on Clara in her crib, he sat on the porch with a glass of wine, contemplating the stars over Denver as he pondered the situation. Part of him wanted to completely cut off any possibility of Camilla approaching Clara, protecting the new family they were building from any influence of the woman who had caused so much suffering. But another part recognized the complexity of the situation. Clara had a right to know her origins, and decisions made now would impact her future. His thoughts were interrupted by Sophia, who appeared at the porch door in her unicorn pajamas. "Can't sleep, Princess?" Richard asked. Sophia shook her head, sitting in the chair next to her father. "Clara cried and I woke up. But Janine is with her now." "I see. Want some hot chocolate?" "No." "Thank you," she replied, watching the starry sky. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course, anything. Why are we taking care of Clara? I know she needs a family, but there are lots of kids at the shelter who need one. Why did we choose her specifically?" The question, seemingly simple, touched the core of all the issues Richard had been grappling with. He looked at his daughter, pondering how to answer honestly but appropriately for her age. "That's a very good question, Sophia," he began. "I think there are several reasons. One is that we learned about her through the social worker precisely because she had a connection to us, even if it was a complicated one. Another is that she was a newborn baby, urgently needing care that a shelter can't provide in the same way a family can, but maybe the most important reason—" Richard paused, organizing his thoughts. "The most important reason is that sometimes in life we find opportunities to turn something negative into something positive. What happened to you, the suffering you went through, was a terrible thing that should never have happened. But from that painful experience, we learned about compassion, about second chances, about building something new from the ruins. Clara gave us the opportunity to do that again." Sophia absorbed the answer in silence, with that contemplative expression that made her seem much older than her 9 years. "So it's like when I planted those old, shriveled tomato seeds from the drawer, and they still grew into beautiful little plants?" Richard smiled, once again impressed by his daughter's intuitive wisdom and her ability to find perfect analogies. "Exactly like that, Sophia. Life sometimes gives us seeds that seem to have no chance, but with care and love, they can blossom into something beautiful and unexpected." Sophia nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. "I guess Clara is our little seed then, and we're her garden." "We are her garden," Richard agreed, feeling a sudden clarity. "And gardens need boundaries and protection, but also sun, air, and space to grow." At that moment, Richard knew what he had to do. He would allow Camilla to receive information about Clara, photos, reports on her development, medical updates, through Edward or the social worker. It was a first step, small and controlled, maintaining the necessary boundaries to protect Sophia and Clara herself, but leaving open the possibility of a broader future understanding when circumstances allowed. The decision, he realized, was not just about Camilla or Clara, but about the family they were building, a family born from adversity, nurtured by compassion, strengthened by the shared experience of pain and healing. As the Denver sky filled with the first rays of the rising sun, Sophia fell asleep, leaning against her father's shoulder. From the nursery came the soft sound of the lullaby Janine was singing to Clara, and Richard, watching the daybreak, felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time, the peace of someone who, even without all the answers, knows he is on the right path. The Morgan family, with its complexities and imperfections, with its healing wounds and its small daily triumphs, would continue its journey of growth, one day at a time, one lesson at a time, building together a future that none of them could have imagined, but that, in some mysterious way, felt exactly as it should be.